The first thing you need to understand about Willowbrook Estates is that it wasn't always the pristine, cookie-cutter nightmare it is today. When I bought my house here 15 years ago, it was different. Wild. Real. My property backed up against a small forest preserve, and I had spent the better part of a decade cultivating a natural barrier of oak trees, maples, and evergreens that created the most beautiful privacy screen you could imagine. Those trees weren't just landscaping to me, they were my sanctuary. After brutal 12-hour days as a structural engineer, I'd come home and sit on my back deck, watching cardinals dart between the branches while squirrels chased each other up the massive oak that had to be at least 50 years old. The trees blocked out the noise from the main road, filtered the air, and gave me the kind of peace that money couldn't buy. But apparently, peace was bad for property values. The new management. Everything changed when Pristine Property Management took over our HOA. The previous management company had been run by Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly woman who mostly concerned herself with making sure people didn't paint their houses neon pink or leave their garbage cans out too long. She understood that a neighborhood was made up of people, not just property values. Pristine Property Management understood only one thing: profit. Their first meeting was held on a Tuesday night in March in the community center that smelled like old coffee and broken dreams. I almost didn't go. I had a project deadline looming, but my neighbor Janet convinced me it was important to show face with the new management. The woman who introduced herself as Victoria Sterling looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Everything about her was sharp: her blazer, her bob haircut, even her smile. She clicked through a PowerPoint presentation titled Maximizing Community Value Through Strategic Improvements. We've identified several areas where Willowbrook Estates is falling behind comparable communities in terms of curb appeal and property values, she announced, her laser pointer dancing across a pie chart. Our initial assessment shows we could increase average home values by 12 to 15% with some targeted improvements. The room buzzed with interest. People started calculating what that might mean for their net worth. One of our primary concerns, Victoria continued, is the inconsistent landscaping throughout the community. Some properties have excessive natural growth that blocks sightlines and creates an unkempt appearance. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what she was talking about. We'll be conducting individual property assessments over the next month and providing homeowners with specific guidance on how to bring their landscaping into compliance with our updated community standards. After the meeting, I tried to approach Victoria, but she was surrounded by eager homeowners asking about their property values. I managed to catch her assistant, a nervous-looking young man clutching a tablet. "Excuse me, I have some mature trees on my property that I'm concerned might be affected by these new standards," I said. He tapped his tablet screen. "Name: David Chen, 247 Oak Ridge Drive." His face went pale as he looked at whatever was on his screen. You'll be receiving a letter soon." That letter arrived 3 days later. The letter. "Dear Mr. Chen, following our recent property assessment of 247 Oak Ridge Drive, we have identified several landscaping violations that must be addressed within 30 days to maintain compliance with Willowbrook Estates Community Standards, Section 4.2.1, Visual Harmony and Sightline Preservation. Specifically, removal of number 7, mature trees exceeding 20 feet in height along the rear property line. Trimming of remaining vegetation to a maximum height of 8 feet. Installation of approved low-maintenance landscaping as per attached guidelines. These modifications are necessary to maintain unobstructed sightlines throughout the community and ensure consistent aesthetic standards that preserve property values for all residents. Failure to comply within the specified time frame will result in fines of $200 per day until corrections are made. The HOA reserves the right to perform necessary corrections at the homeowner's expense if compliance is not achieved within 60 days. For your convenience, we have included a list of pre-approved landscaping contractors who can perform this work efficiently and cost-effectively. Sincerely, Victoria Sterling, Community Standards Director, Pristine Property Management. I read the letter 3 times before the words really sunk in. They wanted me to cut down trees that had been growing for decades, trees that predated the HOA by years, trees that were perfectly healthy and beautiful and home to countless birds and small animals. 7 trees, including my beloved old oak. The fight. I didn't go down without a fight. I spent the next 2 weeks researching HOA law, reading through our community charter, and documenting everything I could about my trees. I took photographs from every angle, researched the environmental impact, even got a certified arborist to write a letter about the tree's health and ecological value. The night before the next HOA meeting, I prepared a presentation that would have made my engineering professors proud. Charts showing how the trees reduce stormwater runoff, data on their carbon sequestration, photos of the wildlife they supported, a timeline proving the trees had been there before the current HOA agreements were even drafted. But Victoria Sterling had prepared too. "Mr. Chen," she said when I finished my presentation to a room of mostly disinterested neighbors, "we appreciate your passion for your landscaping. However, the community voted to prioritize property values and visual consistency. The trees in question block the view corridor we're establishing throughout the development." "What view corridor?" I asked. "My backyard faces the nature preserve. There's nothing to see except more trees." That's when she clicked to her next slide, and my blood ran cold. The slide showed an aerial view of our neighborhood, but it wasn't current. It was a projection. Where the nature preserve currently stood, the image showed a new development. Willowbrook Estates Phase 2, luxury homes with panoramic views. "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to. Victoria's smile could have cut glass. "Pristine Property Management has an agreement to purchase the nature preserve from the county. We're going to develop it into premium housing. The tree removal throughout the existing community is designed to ensure that all current homeowners will have beautiful views of our new lake community, which will significantly boost everyone's property values." The room erupted in excited chatter. People were already imagining their homes overlooking a sparkling lake instead of a bunch of messy trees. I felt sick. The massacre. I tried everything. I called the county commissioners, but the deal was already done. I contacted environmental groups, but the nature preserve was small and apparently not significant enough to save. I even consulted with a lawyer, but our HOA agreement had been updated the previous year when I was traveling for work and missed the vote, to give the management company broader authority over community aesthetics. The 30 days flew by in a blur of desperate phone calls and sleepless nights. When the final notice came, I still refused to cut down my trees. That's when they brought in the contractors. I was at work when it happened, trapped in a client meeting, while a team of men with chainsaws turned my 15 years of careful cultivation into a pile of logs and sawdust. By the time I got home, my backyard looked like a war zone. The old oak, the magnificent tree that had shaded my deck through countless summer barbecues and provided a home for generations of squirrels, was gone. In its place was a neat pile of wood chips and a view of my neighbor's house that I had never wanted. I stood in my devastated backyard as the sun set, surrounded by the stumps of trees that had been older than I was, and I felt something change inside me. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, something harder and colder. Anger. The research. That night, I did what I do best. I engineered a solution. I started with the property lines, pulling out the original survey and the HOA charter. I studied building codes, height restrictions, and fence regulations. I researched materials and structural requirements. I calculated sight lines and wind loads and drainage patterns. Most importantly, I researched Victoria Sterling and Pristine Property Management. What I found was fascinating. Victoria Sterling wasn't just some property manager, she was a principal partner in Meridian Development Group, the company that was buying the nature preserve. She stood to make millions from the new development, but only if existing homeowners had clear views of the new lake community. Trees blocking those views would hurt her sales. The whole thing was a scam. She was using her position as HOA manager to bulldoze regulations that would benefit her private development company. It was probably illegal, but proving it would take years and cost a fortune I didn't have. But I didn't need to prove it in court. I just needed to make sure it didn't work. The plan. The HOA regulations were very specific about trees. Maximum height, 8 feet. No exceptions. But they said nothing about walls. I pulled the original building codes for our community and cross-referenced them with county zoning laws. The HOA could regulate landscaping, but structural improvements fell under different rules. As long as I stayed within county building codes and didn't violate any sightline easements, which I wouldn't because my property line was clear, I could build whatever I wanted on my own land. I spent 3 weeks designing the perfect structure. Not just a wall, but a living wall system that would be both beautiful and functional while completely blocking any views from the future development. Then I started making phone calls. The construction. I hired Miguel Santos, a contractor I'd worked with on several commercial projects. Miguel specialized in sustainable construction and had a particular genius for living wall systems. When I explained what I wanted to do and why, his eyes lit up. "You want to stick it to the HOA?" he said, grinning. "I know exactly how to do that." We started work on a Monday morning. The structure itself was elegantly simple, a 20-foot-tall concrete and steel frame that ran along the entire rear property line. But the genius was in the details. The wall incorporated built-in irrigation systems, soil pockets, and climbing structures for plants. It was designed to eventually support a vertical garden that would be even more lush and private than my original trees. But the immediate effect was more dramatic. From my backyard, the wall was beautiful, a clean, modern structure that would soon be covered in greenery. But from the other side, where the future Willowbrook Estates Phase 2 would be built, it was an imposing concrete barrier that blocked any view of the existing neighborhood. The HOA couldn't do anything about it because it wasn't landscaping. It was a structure, and I had pulled all the proper permits. But Victoria Sterling tried anyway. The confrontation. She showed up on Thursday morning with the same nervous assistant, a clipboard, and a camera. "Mr. Chen," she called out as I supervised McGill's crew installing the irrigation system. "Mr. Chen, we need to speak with you immediately." I walked over, still wearing my hard hat and work boots. "Good morning, Victoria. How can I help you?" "This," she gestured wildly at the wall, "this is completely unacceptable. You cannot build this structure without HOA approval." "Actually, I can," I said calmly. "I pulled all the proper permits from the county. The structure meets all building codes and doesn't violate any easements. Since it's not landscaping, it falls outside HOA jurisdiction." Her face was turning red. "The spirit of the community standards," I interrupted, "is to maintain property values. This wall will increase my property value significantly. It's a premium architectural feature." "It's blocking the view corridor." "From where?" I asked innocently. "All it's blocking is the view from the vacant nature preserve, and since that's not part of our community, I don't see how that's an HOA concern." That's when she played her trump card. "Fine," she said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the county building inspector. This structure is clearly not up to code." "Please do," I said. "Ask for Inspector Rodriguez. He's the one who signed off on the permits. I think he'll be very interested to hear from you." The inspection. Inspector Rodriguez showed up that afternoon, and I could tell from his expression that Victoria had indeed called him. He was not happy. "Miss Sterling," he said, approaching Victoria, who was still lurking around my property line, "I understand you have concerns about this construction project. It's clearly a violation. No one builds walls like this in residential areas." Rodriguez looked at the wall, then at his paperwork, then at me. "Mr. Chen, this is the living wall system we discussed." "That's right. Full irrigation, native plant integration, designed for minimal maintenance and maximum environmental benefit."
And the structural specifications? I handed him a folder. All calculations reviewed and approved by a licensed structural engineer. I smiled. That would be me. Rodriguez flipped through the papers, nodded, then turned to Victoria. Ma'am, this is one of the most well-documented and properly permitted structures I've seen in years. Mr. Chen has exceeded all building code requirements and has even included environmental impact mitigation measures that weren't required. Victoria's face went pale. But surely the height is well within county limits for residential structures on properties of this size. Mr. Chen, you've done excellent work here. I'll be recommending this as a model project for sustainable residential construction. After Rodriguez left, Victoria stood staring at the wall for a long moment. Then she looked at me with something that might have been respect. You're going to destroy the entire development, she said quietly. No, I'm just protecting my view. The revelation. The wall was completed on a Friday. Miguel's crew cleaned up the construction materials, tested the irrigation system, and installed the first wave of climbing plants that would eventually cover the entire structure. I stood on my deck that evening, admiring their work and imagining how beautiful it would be in a year or two.
That's when Janet from next door came over with a bottle of wine and a concerned expression. David, she said, settling into one of my deck chairs, I need to tell you something. I opened the wine and waited. I knew about the development, she said finally. Victoria approached several of us months ago, before they took over the HOA. She offered us money to vote for the new landscaping standards. I nearly dropped my glass. What? Not much, Janet said quickly. A few $100s each. She said it was a community improvement incentive. Most people thought it sounded reasonable. Who doesn't want higher property values? But you didn't tell me. Janet looked ashamed. I should have. I knew you loved those trees. But honestly, David, I didn't think it would matter much. I thought you'd just trim them back and that would be the end of it. How many people knew? Maybe a dozen homeowners? The ones whose properties would have the best views of the new lake. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. The whole thing had been even more calculated than I'd realized. Victoria had bought off enough homeowners to guarantee the vote she needed, then use the HOA as a weapon to clear the sightlines for her development. But there was something else Janet wasn't telling me. I could see it in her face. What else? I asked. She sighed. The development isn't just luxury homes, David. It's condos, high-density housing. The lake is going to be artificial, a retention pond for stormwater management, and there are going to be at least 200 units. My blood ran cold. 200 units meant 400-plus cars, massive infrastructure changes, and traffic that would turn our quiet neighborhood into a nightmare. But more than that, Janet, where is all that storm water going to go when the retention pond overflows? She pointed toward the back of our properties, down the slope toward our houses. The perfect storm. That weekend, I made some phone calls to former colleagues who worked in municipal planning and environmental engineering. What they told me confirmed my worst fears. The development Victoria was planning was going to be an environmental disaster. The nature preserve wasn't just empty land, it was actually a natural floodplain that had been absorbing stormwater runoff for decades. Paving it over and filling it with buildings would redirect massive amounts of water downhill during heavy rains. Toward our neighborhood. The artificial lake was supposed to handle the stormwater, but I ran the calculations myself. It was undersized by at least 40%. During a major storm, the kind we got every few years, it would overflow and send a torrent of water directly into our backyards. But there was more. I dug deeper into Meridian Development Group's other projects and found a pattern of environmental corner cuttings, cost overruns, and developments that created problems for surrounding communities. Victoria Sterling was good at getting projects approved quickly by promising things she never intended to deliver.
The kicker? The whole development was being financed through a complicated web of shell companies and municipal bonds that would leave taxpayers holding the bag if anything went wrong. I had all the evidence I needed to stop the development, but I also had something better. A 20-foot wall that was going to make Victoria's whole project economically unviable. The phone call. Victoria called me on Sunday evening. I could hear the desperation in her voice. "Mr. Chen, I think we need to have a conversation." "I'm listening." "I'm prepared to offer you a substantial settlement to remove the wall. We're talking about enough money to completely re-landscape your property with mature trees that would be even more beautiful than what you lost." "How substantial?" $50,000. I almost laughed. "Victoria, my wall cost $30,000 to build and will add at least that much to my property value. Why would I take $50,000 to tear down something I like better than the trees?" There was a long pause. "Because if you don't, I'll make your life very difficult. HOA violations, fines, legal challenges. I can make it very expensive for you to live in this neighborhood." "You could try, but I don't think you will." "Why not?" "Because I know about the stormwater problem and the financing issues and the fact that you've been bribing homeowners to vote for HOA changes that benefit your private business." Silence. "I also know that you need this development to succeed because Meridian Development Group is leveraged to the hilt on 3 other projects that are behind schedule and over budget. If Willowbrook Phase 2 fails, you're looking at bankruptcy." More silence. "But here's the thing, Victoria. I don't actually want to destroy your business. I just want you to build something that won't destroy my neighborhood." We met the next evening at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhood and downtown. Victoria looked tired and older than she had at that first HOA meeting. The sharp edges were still there, but they seemed brittle now. "What do you want?" she asked without preamble. "I want the development redesigned," I said, sliding a folder across the table. I had spent the entire weekend creating an alternate development plan that would still be profitable while addressing the environmental concerns. "This reduces the unit count by 60%, she said, "but increases the price per unit by 40%. You'll make almost as much money with a lot less risk." She studied the numbers and I could see her running calculations in her head. "The financing is already in place for the high-density project." "Then restructure it. You're good at that." Victoria looked up from the papers. "And if I do this, you'll take down the wall?" "No, I like the wall, but I'll plant it with flowering vines instead of thorny ones, and I'll make sure the design is beautiful from both sides." She almost smiled. "You're going to keep the wall no matter what, aren't you?" "Victoria, you cut down trees that took decades to grow, trees that were home to countless animals, that cleaned our air and managed stormwater naturally, that gave me peace after long days dealing with people who think everything can be reduced to a profit margin." I leaned forward. "You took something irreplaceable and turned it into wood chips for no reason other than greed. So yes, I'm keeping the wall. Consider it a monument to the consequences of short-sighted thinking." The twist. 3 months later, I was in my backyard watering the climbing roses that were starting to cover the lower section of my wall when I heard voices from the other side. The nature preserve had been cleared and construction had begun on Victoria's revised development. "The sight lines from this section are completely blocked. We'll never get premium prices for units that face a concrete wall." "It's not permanent," came Victoria's voice, and I could hear something like admiration in her voice. "The wall is designed as a living system. In 2 years, it'll be covered with plants and look like a natural green barrier. Actually, it'll be more attractive than the old trees." "But it still blocks the view." "No, Victoria said, and I could hear something like admiration in her voice. It creates a different view. These units will overlook a private garden wall instead of other people's backyards. We can market them as having exclusive, curated sightlines. I smiled and kept watering my roses. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Miguel Santos. "David, you need to see something. Can you meet me at the job site?" I found him standing at the edge of the new development, pointing toward my wall. "Look at that," he said. The wall was beautiful. The climbing plants had filled in more quickly than I had expected, and the integrated irrigation system kept everything lush and green. But what Miguel was pointing at wasn't the plants. It was the birds. Dozens of them, cardinals, blue jays, finches, and species I didn't recognize were flitting around the wall, landing on the built-in perches Miguel had cleverly incorporated into the design, and building nests in the plant pockets. "They're all coming back," Miguel said. "All the birds that lost their homes when they cut down your trees. The wall is giving them a new place to live." I watched a pair of cardinals investigating a particularly cozy spot near the top of the wall and felt something I hadn't experienced since that terrible day when I came home to find my trees gone. Peace. The epilogue. 1 year later, Willowbrook Estates Phase 2 opened to grand fanfare. Victoria had done an impressive job with the redesign. The lower-density development featured attractive townhomes around a genuinely beautiful artificial lake with extensive native plant landscaping and state-of-the-art stormwater management. The units facing my wall were marketed as Garden View Premium Residences and sold for 15% more than comparable units elsewhere in the development. Victoria sent me a thank you card when the last unit sold. I was sitting on my deck one evening watching the sunset paint my wall in shades of gold and amber when Janet came over with another bottle of wine. "You know," she said, settling into her usual chair, "I think you might have done us all a favor." "How's that?" "Well, for one thing, our property values did go up, just not for the reasons Victoria originally planned. Having a premium development next door helped, but having your wall as a privacy barrier made it even better." She poured the wine and continued. "But more than that, you showed everyone that sometimes fighting back is worth it. The new HOA management is a lot more reasonable than pristine property management ever was." "What happened to Victoria?" "She started her own company. Sustainable Development Solutions, something like that. Apparently, she's become quite the advocate for environmentally responsible construction." I raised my glass. Good for her. "David," Janet said after we'd sat in comfortable silence for a while, "do you ever miss the trees?" I looked at my wall, now completely covered in flowering vines and alive with the sound of birds settling in for the night. The structure had become something more than I'd ever imagined. Not just a barrier, but a thriving vertical ecosystem that supported more wildlife than my original trees ever had. "No," I said finally, "I think this is better." And as if to prove my point, a family of squirrels came scrambling down from the upper levels of the wall, chasing each other through the grapevines I'd planted along the base, their chittering laughter echoing through the evening air. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's creating something so much better than what you lost that you end up grateful for the loss. But I still kept the receipts from the wall construction in my files just in case anyone ever asked whether it had been worth it. 20 feet of concrete and steel covered in flowers and filled with life. Worth every penny.